Welcome, everyone. I'm Kate Byrne. I'm the president of Intentional and SoCap Global, and we are really excited to have you join us on the kickoff event of what will be a five-part series based on Ronald Cohen's terrific book, all about reshaping capitalism, impact. Now, why is this so important? It's because 50 years ago on Sunday, Milton Friedman wrote the famous note to the New York Times talking about shareholder primacy. Clearly, that's something that we're all beginning to question quite seriously as to its relevance. This conversation is going to be focusing on the role of the social entrepreneur. The following are going to be talking about and sharing conversations from the other stakeholder groups, and we hope you'll join us for all five. Before I get into introductions, just some housekeeping rules. Would love to hear where you're coming from, where you're joining us from. We'd love to hear also what's something you'd like to have as a takeaway from the conversation. And then finally, wanted to lay out a little bit of how the conversation is going to flow. We're going to probably have a conversation about 30 to 40 minutes back and forth. As you put in your questions, I'll start feathering them up towards the end of that. We'll then have more of a 15-minute Q&A period. We'll adjust those questions, and then we'll close. So with that, let's begin the conversation. Some background, Ronald Cohen, the man, the myth, the very humble legend, philanthropist, former private equity investor, extraordinary. He's the chairman of GSG, the Global Steering Committee. He is also chairman of Portland Trust. He has Oxford and Harvard background. He's an author, and he's literally one of the leading thinkers and has been since the beginning of impact investing. We're really honored to have you, and thank you. Joining us on the other side, we have the up and coming entrepreneur of the future, and that is Cedric Chavez, who is the founder of Feed, a food bank app, and he's already had quite a number of wins in his illustrious young career, being recognized by Microsoft. He's the president of the Texas Net Impact Chapter and a Forbes Fellow. And leading the conversation is one of my favorites, Professor Bobby Palmer, who is a Shannon Smith Emerging Scholar at the Darden School of Business at UVA. He is a renowned social ethicist in business, co-producer of the film Fishing with Dynamite, and author in his own right, The Power of And. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks so much for setting us up, Kate. I'm really excited to spend time with the panelists today and to get some questions and exciting insights from the audience on a topic that's near and dear to my heart, the ability of business to make an impact in society. And we've got some great folks here to shed light from their personal experience on this topic. And so I'm going to just start off with a kind of a general question. How is impact transforming entrepreneurship? Ronnie, why don't you start off, and then Cedric, you can jump in with that as well with your personal experience. How is impact transforming entrepreneurship?
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Kate, for the introduction. Cedric, great to be chatting with you too in this hour, and welcome to everyone on this webinar. When I started out, Bobby, entrepreneurship was a very rare thing. It was in the mid-60s. It was just starting out in the United States, and the idea of starting a small company that could become big was really not an intuitive one. It was the age of the big companies, and it was thought that only big companies could innovate. And what we saw was of the power of entrepreneurship to imagine the world as it could be, and to provide technology or other platforms to achieve profit, enabled some of the biggest companies in the world today, half a dozen of the biggest companies in the world in 25 years, to overtake all the established rivals. I think today we are at a similar juncture, and it involves doing good and doing well at the same time. If you're an entrepreneur, and you decide today that you want to take advantage of a market opportunity, how does that market opportunity help solve a social or environmental problem? And so while in my youth, I started what became APAC's partners, a venture capital and private equity house, when I was 26. So I can empathize with Cedric and his generation. When I started out, these concepts were completely new. Something happened when we began to get role models. Today, in the impact space, we're beginning to get role models. You have Elon Musk, and as an example of an entrepreneur who decided to change the way in which automobiles pollute. And actually to change the whole of the automobile industry in the process and create a company that's more valuable than his biggest competitors. And so today, the difference would be that you have to build a business model where the more impact you deliver, the more money you make, and you can become as big as any venture has become previously. And if a unicorn previously was a venture that became worth $1 billion, an impact unicorn is one that also improves 1 billion lives.
That's fantastic. Thank you. It makes me think about this idea of businesses creating value. And what I love about the terminology of impact is it allows us to imagine in more detail the different types of value that businesses can create. Right? Whether it's sustainability, whether it's value for employees, whether it's addressing issues around poverty, business can be a vehicle for creating that type of value, of having that kind of impact. I think that's really powerful. And it's amazing to see how the younger generation and all generations are becoming more enthusiastic about this idea. Cedric, can you tell us a little bit about your work with Feed and particularly how you think about impact and social entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so a little bit of background on kind of how Feed started. Actually, it was a impact-based hackathon. So that's kind of one way that it's changing. We had a hackathon that was composed of business students, computer science students, and communication design students. And that's kind of how Feed was born. We really wanted to help our local food bank, but we really didn't know what they really needed help with. And so a group of us got together after that hackathon and went to the food bank and said, hey, we want to help you guys. We're not sure kind of what you need help with, but they were really open to us helping them. We volunteered with the Hayes County Food Bank for about 3 months, and we learned their processes. And what we really identified was that they had legacy processes that needed to be solved. So our Hayes County Food Bank operated as a food bank and a food distribution, meaning that they go out to stores like Walmart and they collect donated food, they bring them back to the food bank, and then they repackage them, and then they send them out to families. And throughout that process, they have to log in the food and log out the food. And they were doing all of that on paper. And it would take up to 6 hours of data entry a week just to enter in all of the data into their database. So we really wanted to eliminate that 6 hours of data entry. And what that would enable them to do is have easy access to their data. And then when they apply for grants, they also need specific data, such as how much food have you thrown away in the last 3 months, or just different requirements. And this would give them an easy way to access that data. And so that's kind of what we were working on. And we were fortunate enough to win another impact event with Net Impact and Microsoft, the Microsoft Media Pitch Off, where we won $6,000 in seed funding to actually develop this web application. And from there, it kind of blew up. We were also recognized by LinkedIn in the LinkedIn Compassion Awards as the top 50 groups and organizations bringing compassion into the world. We were admitted into GitHub's Open Source for Good program to open source our software for other food banks that may have similar issues. And it's been kind of crazy because we were just, a group of students who were full-time students with part-time jobs working on a project for our local food bank.
Wow, that's a really cool story. And, it just underscores the power of passionate individuals who want to make a difference, actually making that happen. So I know that in our audience, we have lots of folks who are, impact investors, investors of different types, maybe some folks who are running their own, starting their own ventures or running their own organizations. Let's make sure we're all talking about the same thing here. Let's get some clarity on our definitions and our concepts here. Ronnie, can you give us an example of how impact investing works? Like, help ground us in the same experience here.
Okay, so I'll start with an example of impact entrepreneurship, if I may, because then it becomes easier to understand what the role of the investor is, Bobby.
Great.
So let me take a company from here in Israel where I sit. And one of the characteristics of impact entrepreneurship today is that, as in Cedric's case, it very often involves technology. So a very successful entrepreneur here who sold his company out to Intel for $15 billion, Mobileye, had an aunt who was going blind. And his aunt said, you're a bright guy and you've been into vision for driverless cars, you should be able to help me. And 6 years ago, he said, you know what, I think our technology can help my aunt. And he created a company called Orcam. And the company creates spectacles for the blind. What does that mean? They are spectacles which have a device rather like a memory stick hanging off the side, and they whisper into the ear of the wearer the page of the book they're reading, professionally read, wonderfully intoned, and at the same time, the banknote in their hand or the letter that's just come through the post or whatever. Now, you'd say, that's a fantastic impact venture because it really does optimize risk, return, and impact. Here's a product that can help 35 million blind people in the world and another 250 million visually impaired people. So that's 300 million person market. And indeed, the company's been successful. Last round was $600 million valuation. It raised $100 million so far. But where impact entrepreneurship comes in is you say to yourself, how can my technology help the maximum number of people in the world? Now, we don't usually ask that, Bobby, in business schools when we're looking at the case of creating a venture, right? We think, how am I going to get my share of the market? You don't ask yourself, how can I help the maximum number of people? And you get a surprising answer, which shows you the power of impact thinking when you're an entrepreneur. Because the answer is, what if you gave these spectacles to the 800 million illiterate people in the world, illiterate adults in the world? Right, what does that do for their lives and livelihoods? What does it do for their economies or for the world economy to bring 800 million from not being able to read to being able to read? So an impact venture has a purpose to solve a particular problem. In this case, the problem of enabling blind people to lead normal lives. There isn't a trade-off with making money. If you have a $1.1 billion market, that's a massive market. And you wouldn't have discovered it if you hadn't asked yourself the question, would any one of your students previously, Bobby, have decided to create a venture to help the most vulnerable in society, the illiterate? Probably not. But today, in the generation that Cedric represents and other generations before, this is characterizing a lot of entrepreneurship. And my contention is that the disruption that tech brought in business models is going to be brought now through impact models. Like the way that Tesla disrupted the automobile industry, the way that Orcam is going to enable new industries to be created. catering for the the underserved. These are disruptive business models. And so the investors now in these ventures can say, I'm optimizing risk return impact by investing in a fund which is looking for these types of opportunities. I can invest in the public markets for a company of this kind. If this company goes public, I'll invest in it. So the characteristic today of risk return impact is, in my view, that it attracts the talent like Cedric. It offers more potential, and therefore there is no trade-off. You should be able to deliver better financial results and better growth if you optimize risk return impact than if you just optimize risk return.
Right, right. That example is so helpful, right? Because so much of my work is about helping business leaders, entrepreneurs understand that how we make money is just as important as the money that we make, right? And one of my colleagues has conducted a study that I find really instructive. And the study was conducted in the context of for-profit gold mines. And for a long time, a mining company would look at basically three variables, whether it would decide to mine in one particular region or another. What's the market price of gold? What's the cost of extraction? And how much gold do we think is in this particular region? And you do the math, and you think you can make money, you would dig in that area. And what my colleague did is he and his research team went back and looked at every media mention of these mining companies and coded them for positive or negative stakeholder relationships. So is the local town excited about jobs, right? The job creation that's happening, that you'd code that as a positive stakeholder relationship. Is there a problem with the union? Maybe there's some wage conflict with the union. He would code that as a negative stakeholder relationship. And what they found when they looked at this distribution of positive and negative stakeholder relationships on the stock price is that it was worth 2 times the price of the gold coming out of the mine if you had positive stakeholder relationships, if you had supportive communities, if you had employees who were excited to be at work. And I think what's driving this impact revolution is people are tired of businesses making money by forcing externalities on other stakeholder groups, right? By saying, you know what, there's a cost that some other stakeholder group, whether it's the environment or the government or society, has to bear. And I think something that's really powerful about this idea of impact ventures and impact investing is that we are measuring and pricing those externalities back into the investments.
Yeah. Well, Bobby, we've had breakthroughs in the last month using technology. At Harvard Business School, the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative published the cost, the environmental cost created by 1,800 companies.
Wow.
And talk about being blind, you now begin to see that 15% of these companies, 250 plus companies, deliver more environmental damage than they do profit. More right. Environmental damage. Their profit would be wiped out if you set off the environmental damage, the externalities right. to which you... A full third, or 32%, nearly a third, deliver environmental damage equivalent to 25% of their profit. Now, if investors look at 3 oil companies, and I'm not in favor of investing in oil companies, as I mentioned in the book, but in the book Impact, I look at ExxonMobil, Shell, and BP, companies of similar size. ExxonMobil delivers from its operations alone $39 billion of environmental damage a year. Shell delivers 13, and BP delivers 8, from memory. Now, even if you want to have fossil fuels in your portfolio, does it make sense for you to invest in ExxonMobil when you know these numbers? No, because you think it's going to get regulated or it's going to get taxed. The talent's going to go away from it. This is a terrible terrible polluting company, and it's a laggard relative to its competitors. Its competitors will deliver a better combination of profit and impact, and in the end, better profits, because they're, you know, for all the reasons we've just gone through. So you're absolutely right. When you begin to measure impact, you begin to make different types of investment decisions. And if you look at the same database, you will see that there is already what you just talked about, which is a correlation between companies that pollute more and lower stock market valuations. Right. It doesn't happen in every sector yet because we don't have transparency everywhere, but it's already showing. So what's the lesson that the executives you teach are going to take from this? They're going to say, if I don't deliver better impact performance, my company is going to be worth less. It's as easy as that. So I better get on and start solving problems instead of creating them, because now everybody can see the problems I'm creating. A single company creates nearly $200 billion of environmental damage a year. Right. In that data set. It's unbelievable. Right.
Quick question, Ronnie, what was the name of that study again? The audience wants to know. I'll type it.
The study was conducted. Oh, go ahead, Ronnie. Was the question for Ronnie?
I just wanted to know the name of the study.
This one.
Yes, you just referenced. I'll type it in the chat.
Go to the Harvard Business School site and look for IWA, Impact Weighted Accounts.
Perfect.
And you'll be able to manipulate the figures. It's an interactive database, open source, free. Spread the word about it, but you'll be amazed at what you discover.
That's great. Thank you for that. So one question I think, might be on our audience's minds, or, certainly when we talk about impact with our students is on their mind is it harder? Is the bar higher? Is it harder to start a business that is impact focused versus a business that is purely profit focused? Cedric, what do you think?
Do you want to ask Cedric whether he found it difficult to recruit friends or easier because of his mission?
Yeah, I think from the trying to get funds, it's a little bit more difficult because as you guys mentioned, profitability, they really aren't, they're mostly focusing on traditional profitability. And one of the challenges that we faced was that actually, but also in the same breath, there's also people who are really passionate about impact. And if you find those people will be willing to invest in your venture. For example, we're working on food insecurity. And once we got in conversations with people who were really passionate about food insecurity, then it was a lot easier to explain what we were trying to do and the potential impact that it could have in the community. As for kind of, college students working within food insecurity, I think that, or impact in general, I think that, it was really easy to recruit people. Everybody on our team was full-time college students with part-time jobs, and they still found the time to, work on feed because they realized that they could have a real impact in their community. And, we're working locally at our food bank, but really it's kind of a global issue that we're trying to chip away at.
So I would agree with Cedric, Bobby. I think you attract better talent and you achieve more if people are passionate about the mission of a company than if they're in a company that just wants to make money. What is challenging is that it's new, in the same way that in the 70s, when I started out, entrepreneurship was new. People didn't know how to go about creating a business plan and stuff like that. And today, I'll take the example of my own daughter, who is 33 and has moved from, she was in the UK, then in the US, and she moved to Israel. And with 2 tech partners, she wanted to go into fintech, but she wanted to create an impact venture in the fintech space. Okay, the reason they wanted to do fintech, one of her partners had been very successful in a previous job in the fields, and they knew something about it. So it took them a while to define the product. but they defined a fintech platform that enables people basically to manage their finances, to look at their cash flows, to look at how much money they will have available to spend if they make a decision to spend it on, on a holiday or a meal or whatever. What happens if there's an unexpected item of expenditure? And the idea is that you can get people off overdraft into saving just because they manage their lives better. Now, there have been studies to show that when people are under stress, their IQ drops by 25%. They make, they make poor decisions. And this is true of everyone. So they've now created a company called Rise Up. They've raised more than $20 million. Now, why have investors who are venture capital firms and high net worth individuals, hedge fund managers, why have they gone into this? They've gone into it for two reasons. One, they think this company can be as valuable as any other fintech company they have. Think of the number of people across the world who are under some type of financial pressure. And you have the ability to wean them off expensive funding into cheap funding. So you also have the ability to provide them with new tailor-made financial services. So there's very big upside globally. But two, there is this sense among many investors today that our investments have to help improve the world. We can't continue in a world which digs an increasingly deep hole for itself because companies create harm and governments tax everyone to remedy the harm, and they never have enough money to do it, so the situation keeps getting worse. So investors who are putting today $40 trillion, $30 to $40 trillion into environmental, social governance investing and impact investing, the distinction being that ESG investing doesn't measure its impact, and impact investing does. And with the Harvard Business School effort adding next year to operational impact, product impact, and employment impact, we will begin to get transparency on all the impacts of companies, and we will be able to turn the 30-40 trillion of ESG into impact investing. Because as you know, Bobby, impact investing today is about $700 billion across the world, which is in 6 or 7 years, since we wrote the G8 Task Force report about this, is good going. It's going to hit a trillion today. Yeah. Venture capital and private equity are only 5 trillion. So this is major.
One of the arguments you make in the book that I found really compelling is this idea that when we measure and intentionally manage impact, we can more quickly find remedies for social ills, that we can figure out what works faster, and we can scale that more effectively. And so not only is it a mechanism to actually address social ills and to generate profit simultaneously, but we can learn faster about what's working, the conditions under which it's working, and then scale that as well. Can you share with us any examples of impact ventures that are doing a good job of learning about the underlying mechanisms?
What do you mean when you say the underlying mechanism,
yeah,
Bobby?
So I was really moved by the story in chapter 1 around recidivism in prisons. And oh, yeah. I'm sure there's lots of different kinds of organizations that pick any kind of social cause and say, oh, we have a recipe for reducing recidivism in prisons, or we have a recipe for reducing poverty. But impact investing allows you to find the better recipe faster.
Yeah. So, I mean, this goes into Cedric's venture in a way, in the direction of Cedric's venture, because if you look at the way in which social entrepreneurs have worked until now, they've mainly done it, almost 90% plus of them, have done it through charitable organizations. And when they raise charity money, the people giving them the money, or the foundation giving them the money, are saying, you're going to have to visit the prisoner 4 times a week, and you're going to teach them this and you're going to teach them that. So focusing on funding the activities. And then 2 or 3 years later, the donors say, you know, I have to help so many other people deal with other social issues, I have to move on. So the result is every charitable organization virtually in the world has 2 characteristics in common. It's small and it has no money. So the idea came to us to bring investment capital to social entrepreneurs using charitable models. And we invented in 2010 the social impact bond. And what you described is exactly what happened. Because the way the social impact bond works, I think it'll interest you all, is you get somebody to promise to pay you, in this case, the British government, for a reduction in the number of young people going back to jail. Now, over 60% of young people go back to jail within 18 months of release across the world. And governments have a rough time with that because it's expensive to take them through the law courts and expensive to keep them in prison. So we said to the government, we will raise £5 million for you, and you will promise to pay that money back with a rate of return depending on certain numbers being hit. If we don't hit the numbers, the money was a gift. But if we reduce the number of prisoners going back to jail by more than 7.5%, government will pay back the £5 million and an increasing return beyond that. In the event, we reduced it by 9.7%, and the investors got their money back and made a 3.1% return. Now, the big difference, as you were explaining, is that unlike the philanthropic model, where people tell you what to do, you're backing social entrepreneurs. You're saying to them, look, we have a problem with young prisoners coming back to jail. You've been working in the field. We'll help you, like a venture capitalist helps an investee, but you got to find the solution. And so they start delving into the problem in the way they've never delved before, that the prisoners are leaving with the $50 in their pocket. That's not going to get them to the next payment from the government. They often have family problems. They ruined their relationship with their family when they were sent to prison. They may have a drug habit. They may not have a place to sleep that night. And so these organizations then begin to solve the problem. And what we are doing now is we're scaling this up massively. So instead of government paying a loan, we're setting up 2 $1 billion outcomes funds, as we call them, in education, one for Africa and the Middle East, and one for India. And when you set up a fund of this kind, which is a pool of money which has philanthropic aid, philanthropic money, government aid, local government money, that pool then enters into a contract with a non-profit or a profit with purpose business and says, look, if you get 300,000 kids through their education, we will pay you $30 million. Okay? Now, the entrepreneur running that social organization goes to a fund which has an impact bond fund of a couple of $100 million and says, look, I'm going to get 30 million if I achieve that. I think it's going to cost me 20 million to do it. If you'll put the 20 million up, we will pay you back your money and we will pay you a return on it, and we will keep some of the profit from it. And they use technology, they invent new ways of doing it. They just find the most effective way they can to to achieve the result. And that opens the door, as you were suggesting, to innovation.
Right. Yeah, and I love that in the book, there's just example after example of these different types of arrangements that unleash, the human motivation to help others and to do it in a way that is scalable and sustainable. Where I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So, I think a good transition to that might be thinking about members of our audience that are passionate about impact, right? Some of them are investors. Some of them run large organizations. Some of them are entrepreneurs. If we take those three categories, let's start with investors. What does it take to start to move in this direction? I'm moved by these arguments. I want to make an impact. How can I get started? We'll do investors and then working at a large organization and then entrepreneur. How do I get started down this path of impact?
So it depends what type of investor you talk about. If you're talking of high net worth individuals, some of them are becoming angels for these types of ventures. But if you're talking institutional investors, this is still very new for them. This is like the early days of venture capital. They don't have allocations for it. So you go, if you want to raise an impact venture fund, and you go to a pension fund, they look at you like you're neither venture nor private equity. It smacks of philanthropy, I don't like it type of thing. Now, some do invest, but they are also inhibited because the trustees of the big pension funds think their duty is just to make money. Now we're beginning to see a bit of movement, but not enough. A bit of movement with some of the big pension funds, CalSTRS, CalPERS, and so on, where the pressure of savers and the community is leading them to think a bit in this way and to create allocations. After Black Lives Matter, there's a big push now to fund venture capital funds run by entrepreneurs of color and to back, by venture capitalists of color, to back entrepreneurs of color. So it's moving slowly. The way to make it happen, Bobby, is to provide impact transparency, like we have on profit, on impact, so that a company, which is what the Harvard Business School effort is doing, you can look at the accounts of a company and you can see its profit, and then you can see its profit after you've taken its impact into account. Right. Taking all the pluses and minuses that they delivered through their employment, their product, and their operations, and looking whether their net impact positive or not. Now, when that happens, you're going to find the big pension funds. If you have that transparency, if governments require it, like we did with gap accounting in 1933, investors will have the tools to make informed investment decisions, because they'll be able to look at companies that deliver more environmental damage than their profit and see their valuations go like that. And when they have a company that's delivering both profit and impact, its valuation's going up like that, because other investors want it, and talent like Cedric and his friends want to work for them. Yeah. So we need transparency. And if we don't have transparency, then we have what we've got now, which is impact washing by companies, where they say everything about the good things they're doing and they don't talk about the bad ones, and investors don't really know.
Yeah, if I was a senior leader in an organization, a large organization, I'd be scared to death that there's another organization that's going to figure out my impact before I do. Right. And I think that's really great motivation to say, let's start investing in the systems and processes to really understand all our multiple impacts on society and to manage them effectively before the market creates a reputation for us. Because if once that reputation is cemented, you talked about these large oil companies, once that becomes cemented, it's really hard to undo that. And so as a senior leader in an organization, I can think of, a few things that should supersede this priority of deeply understanding our impact, managing that effectively so that we can be, we can have less risky profits.
Yeah.
Right? What about, Cedric, for the entrepreneur, for an entrepreneur who is interested in moving into this impact space, advice, how do they get started in this area?
Did you ask Cedric or
Sorry
did you ask?
about
Yeah, is that okay? Let me go to Cedric first and I'll come back to you, Ronald. Is that okay?
Yeah, I would like that.
Yeah, I would say definitely start small. It's going to kind of vary from what you're looking at. I know specifically with feed, like I said, we knew that there was there was kind of something wrong with the food bank, and we wanted to help, but we really didn't know what the problem was. So that's why we volunteered for 3 months, understanding the processes, even asking them why they do things certain ways. How can we improve these processes, and just really identifying and being clear on what your goal is that you're trying to achieve from an impact perspective, and whether it could be scalable in the future as well.
Nice. What about you, Ronnie? What would you say to a young entrepreneur like Cedric or some of his colleagues who want to jump into this space?
I would say find an issue that you are passionate about solving, like food security for Cedric. And define a business model that enables you to solve the problem and to make money at the same time. As I mentioned when I talked about tomorrow, my daughter's venture, Rise Up, it takes a bit of doing, but it takes a bit of doing to define any business model. We all know that. But it is feasible, and as Elon Musk has shown, it enables you to create even more value than you would if you didn't have impact as part of your business model.
Yeah, and it's certainly, one trend I've noticed as I work with senior executives sometimes will say to me, I've spent my whole life in this organization, in business, and it bothers me that my children don't see business as a vehicle for improving society. You don't see business as a vehicle for making a difference in the world. And your comments about how it might be a little bit more difficult, but it is more meaningful. It's more impactful. At the end, what is written on your tombstone, 30% growth for 15 years, year over year, versus helping millions of people out of poverty. It's this thing that as human beings gets us out of bed, lights this fire for us to make the world better and to take care of our own financial needs as well. When I hear you all talk about this, the last question I'll ask before we turn to the audience, to me, it sounds like good business. It sounds like this is what an entrepreneur should do. How long is it going to take before we stop saying this is an impact entrepreneur or a social entrepreneur or a B Corp? But this just becomes our expectation of how all businesses, large and small, global or local, this is how they run.
Great question. I think it's when you have impact transparency. It's when you can distinguish the successful companies that are doing both profit and impact. And then everything becomes impact. And those who are not delivering impact are bad impact companies. Today, we look at profit only. And Bobby, our system is defining our values. To be successful today, you ask anybody, you ask Cedric, what does being successful mean? Say, it's making money. But this is changing now. And if you have impact transparency, to be successful is the contribution you make as well as making money. Just making money becomes a dirty word. If I'm just making money by digging coal out of the ground and polluting the atmosphere, who wants to be that? Right. And so we're redefining value of companies on the stock market. We're redefining profit, and we're also redefining success. And if all those on this call want to be respected entrepreneurs recognized as real successes, it'll be because they contributed to society and the environment as well as made money. The world has changed.
Yeah. That's really powerful. It's like a market for lemons kind of argument, right? If we don't measure that quality, if we don't understand that businesses that make an impact, that understand their impact and manage it carefully, if we are not able to value those enterprises effectively, then it's not going to have the same impact. So I love that systemic solution. So we've had some good conversation. I'd really encourage folks to check out this book, Impact. I found it to be a wonderful read, chock full of great examples and innovative thinking around these ideas. But let's open it up for some audience Q&A.
So we've got a couple of questions, and I'm going to go ahead and feather them up. Bruce Allen was two actually have to do with specific groups and audiences. The first is from Bruce Allen, and the primary bearers of the brunts of capitalism are not the users of VC and PE-backed enterprise technology, but rather low income and low skill workers. What are some big picture ideas to drive impact and real change for these folks?
Well, we're going to be facing the issue of reskilling coming out of COVID, right? Because big companies are slimming down, basically, and they're not going to recruit everybody back.
Right.
In order to improve the lives of the unemployed who can't get their own jobs back, we're going to need to reskill them for new jobs. Now, reskilling them from new jobs is something that you would normally expect the government to have a program to do. But through impact investment, you can actually create a business that reskills people. You can be a non-profit that raises investment capital, impact investment, to help reskill them and get paid for it by the government or by philanthropies. So if you're an entrepreneur who is passionate now about helping those who are going to be unemployed through reskilling, come up with a business model that enables you to build a successful enterprise and help large numbers of people who otherwise are going to suffer terrible hardship because they can't get a job because they don't have the skills for it.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add to that really quickly, Kate, before you ask the next question is, many times those folks also have amazing ideas for businesses in their communities as well. So a local example, there was a local gentleman who was differently abled. He was in a wheelchair and was a part of this a local impact fund. And initially, his personal pain point was in going from point A to point B, he couldn't find a taxi cab or an Uber driver that could take him from one place to another. And what he did is he ended up starting his own business, driving people around with the ability to move a wheelchair into a van. And so he started a company of his own that basically was a taxi service or an Uber-like service for other folks who are differently abled. And it saw significant growth in this area. And if we don't give those folks opportunities to share their ideas and their experiences, there are businesses and value that's left on the table.
Another one that has to do with specific audience groups is from Marissa Hill, who asks, from your experiences, what are impact investors doing to make space for Indigenous communities to define, measure, and report on impact in ways that are actually rooted in Indigenous worldviews, values, and principles, and that prioritize their unique understanding of what impact means? Really interesting question.
So I've had conversations in Australia and in Canada and elsewhere about Indigenous communities. I have not seen yet business models that satisfactorily bring solutions to these communities. There's been a lot of talk of impact bonds to help them again skill for employment and so on. But Marissa, you focus on defining a business model that can help these communities and can at the same time grow fast, help increasing numbers of people, and make money.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about this area. I think it's such an important question. One one example that it triggers for me that I think has some positives and negatives. And I can't remember exactly the arrangement that, the name of this arrangement, but I think about some of the oil drilling rights in Alaska and how ownership was divvied up among indigenous tribes, right? And so the ownership of some of the oil wells in those regions is directly given to indigenous tribes in those areas. And so they get a voting share and an ability to drive the direction of some of these oil companies. And so giving them a seat at the table, I think, is a first step towards understanding how these ideas impact them and how they would like to see them impacted. I don't have any more detail than that, but I think it's such an important topic.
It is. And then another person is asking, so people often ask, what industries are good ideas to go into as an entrepreneur because they have high levels of market demand from investors or customers. So what impact industries are good ideas to go into as an entrepreneur?
So there's a lot that needs to be done in education. We have 600 million children in the world who are either not learning at school or out of school. And the number's growing geometrically. Education, using technology to achieve education, is a major opportunity today. Within health, it's obvious after COVID how many opportunities there are. Being able to improve the health of populations through their phones by providing diagnosis of a problem, a health problem they may be getting if they feel unwell, and then telemedicine to cure it is another major area. Frankly, wherever you look, there are people in need. And wherever there are people in need, there's scope for a business model. The financial world, the banking system, with exorbitant charges for poor people, inability to raise credit if you don't have a credit history. If you don't have a bank account, you go to borrow in the gray market and you pay exorbitant charges. That's going to be that is ripe for disruption through impact today. You can imagine financial platforms that enable you to borrow much more cheaply. I mentioned one in the book, Tala, on the basis of your telephone usage, which shows what type of person you are, whether you're reliable and likely to repay a loan or not. So wherever you look, transport. So let me give you some examples of impact ventures that I've been involved with. Public transport. People who are less well off commute longer hours because they live further out. They have to wait for their buses. Create a software company which enables better scheduling of the timing of buses according to the demand that is required at different types of day. Reduce the pollution by having vehicles of different size flowing at certain times of day. Hospitals have a huge issue in insurance reclaims for patients. Create a highly sophisticated AI platform to enable hospitals to reclaim from insurance companies more effectively, to do it automatically instead of laboriously and without mistakes. I could go on, I could give you a string of, read the book is all I could say, Impact, Reshaping Capitalism, to drive real change. You can get it on Amazon. Just read the book. There are 5 examples there of companies, but it gives you a sense that you have to cast around for what's deep inside you as an entrepreneur. It's never about just making money. You know, it's about making money and liking a product and understanding a field and so on. And in this case, it's about being passionate about helping people, a certain category of person that resonates with you because of your family background or because of your friends or because of some life experience which has made you sensitive to their need. So when you begin to think around it, it's not so difficult to define.
I was going to say, I agree. I think pretty much every single system has been based and built, and we're still operating in its original form to some degree. So everything is really up for grabs. In that sense, it's ripe for disruption. I think that's why we've seen so much activity happening. We have got a ton of questions, and I know we'll go a little bit over just because. But I did want to let some of the folks who have asked questions, I will get answers from the group post and send them to you. So I appreciate your understanding that right now. And then Eric Reading had a question regarding what's the most critical standard or regulatory body whose adoption of impact weighted accounts would cascade to a global norm in the financial market to shift to risk, reward, impact thinking?
What a great question. I have been working hard on that, not just today, but every day for months. 2 days ago, the International Accounting Body, IFAC, came out saying we need to shift to sustainable accounting, or sustainability, should I say, accounting. We're going to need our financial regulators, who are very far from this today, the SEC in the case of the United States, our accounting boards, FASB in the case of the US, and IFRS in the case of the rest of the world, to become attuned to these ideas. Where I come out today is people on this call, young entrepreneurs, as consumers, as employees in companies today where you may be working, have a major role to play. If you can influence your parents to find out how their pension plan is being invested, is it following ESG principles? Does it have an allocation to impact investing? That's one thing that you can do. But then we have to work on the big asset management groups, which actually are pretty well coming on side now, groups like BlackRock and so on, because they have the power to influence governments, because they have the right to know. If you're investing 30 or 40% of the world's money in ESG and you don't have transparency on companies' impact, you have the right to know. And so I think investors are the most powerful lever. When you say investors, you mean people who have investment portfolios, they're better off, pension funds, of course, insurance companies. And so I think what we need to do is somehow change the atmosphere now around this right to know. Transparency is a human right. We all have the right to know, if we're working for a company or investing in it or buying its product, what impact that company is creating. But the most powerful force today is investors.
And then I'm going to close because I know we've also got another event coming up. And we could go on forever, but there was a beautiful lead on, frankly, where someone was also asking, what is the best way to actually work with government? And I'm going to use that as a beautiful segue to say, come and join us on October 13th, same time at 9 a.m., when Ronnie will be covering the role of government and answer that exact question. So with that, I hate to do this. Those of you whom I was not able to actually address your questions. I've sent a note directly to you. We will get to you. I'll get the group to answer and we'll share it with you. But with that, wow, that was a fast hour. So Ronnie, thank you so much. Cedric, thank you so much for your time. Bobby, as always, a pleasure. Our next conversation is going to be taking place next Tuesday, where Ronnie is going to be joined by Jackie Vanderbrug from Bank of America, Megan Starr joining us from Carlisle, Jacques Philippe Ververger, who is coming from Ozone X, and the fantastic Leslie Norton from Barron's will be leading us in a conversation, deep dive about impact investing and what the role of that investor is. So please do join us. Gentlemen, closing words.
Leslie, can you send me, Kate, can you send me Leslie Norton's email from Barron's? Closing words: start young, think big, stick with it, and find a big problem to solve.
I'm just passionate about this idea that capitalism can be a human-centered institution, right? This idea that it is a way to bootstrap ourselves up from the world that we find ourselves in to a better world. And that better world is on multiple dimensions, not just profits, but in terms of what it means to be the best human beings we can be for ourselves and for each other.
And I think that for me, it would be to focus on the contribution. That was one of the unintended benefits of FEED, was that it really was a catalyst for our community from the university perspective. After FEED, the university decided to have a Feed the Funnel campaign where it was students, faculty, and staff all came together to pre-package and donate 20,000 meals to our local food bank. So focus on the contribution.
Wonderful. All right, all. Have a terrific week. Thanks for all that you're doing. We know you have a choice of how you spend your time. We're just really grateful that you spend it with us. And until next Tuesday, take care.
Thank you. Bye, Kate.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Cedric. Bye, Bobby.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Ronnie. Bye, Cedric. Bye, Kate.
Bye.
Bye.